A new report commissioned by congressional Democrats says gun violence costs the U.S. $229 billion per year. That same report also found the rate of deaths caused by firearms exceeded the rate of deaths caused by car accidents. White House and congressional lawmakers are currently working on potential gun legislation. Senate Democrats held the floor for nearly 5 hours Tuesday night in an effort to pressure Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to allow a vote. CBS News has learned President Trump is ruling out any proposal that includes universal background checks, bans on high-capacity magazines, or mandatory buybacks, among others. Attorney General William Barr is also meeting with lawmakers to discuss proposals under consideration by the White House. Here's what he had to say while leaving Capitol Hill Wednesday.
Attorney General Barr, how are the meetings going?
Great. Are you getting reception from the Republicans on the plan?
Well, there's no specific plan. We're kicking around ideas, and I'm getting their perspectives.
And what is the reception like?
Well, we're just as I say, exploring different options and ideas, and put me in a better position to advise the president on these
Do you know
issues.
when we'll hear from the president on what his position is?
Can't say right now.
Let's bring in Nancy Cordes. She's on Capitol Hill. Nancy, you spoke with Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania after he met with Attorney General Barr. I want to play some of what he had to say.
Senator, are you confident that the Attorney General supports expanding background checks? And is he making any headway convincing members of your party?
So there's no question the heart of the Attorney General's idea is a mechanism for expanding background checks beyond what we have today. I think I can't speak to the discussions that he has had with my colleagues, but in my conversations with my colleagues, I have colleagues who are open to that. So I'm modestly encouraged.
Okay, modestly encouraged. So Nancy, when can we expect to see a proposal from the White House?
Well, the guidance that we're getting now is that it will probably take a week or two because, as you saw, all of the details are still being worked out, both here on Capitol Hill as the Attorney General meets with various Republicans and back at the White House where they're still trying to determine what it is that the president would support. So at the beginning of the week, we were led to believe that we should see a plan coming out of the White House within the next 24 to 48 hours. That's what key senators had been told as well, but it now looks like this process might drag on a bit, in part because the Attorney General is down here meeting with various Republicans, listening to what they have to say, listening to their concerns, and trying to figure out how you thread this very, very, very narrow needle. One thing that we've learned is that the Attorney General is trying to get Republicans on board with something that they almost universally opposed in the past, expanding background checks, by arguing that it is not just a gun control measure, because that typically turns off a lot of Republicans up here, but that it is a law enforcement measure, that if you take the time to conduct background checks on more firearms, that it assists law enforcement, like the agency that he oversees, when there are various criminal cases that need to be pursued, because then you have a record of those guns and who owns them. We'll see if that argument enables him to make more headway when the National Rifle Association has already come out against just this very vague idea sheet that has been put out by the White House, sort of listing various proposals that they're considering and that the president himself hasn't even signed on to yet.
So one of those Republicans the Attorney General is meeting with, we know he met with Senator Lindsey Graham on Wednesday. Let's listen to some of what he had to say about their meeting.
Here's what I told the Attorney General. Without presidential leadership, this doesn't happen. It doesn't matter what I do in Judiciary Committee. We need a package from the president. And when the president submits a package, if he does, I'll give you my view of whether or not I can support it. But if the president leads here, I will gladly work with him. But I do know this, without it coming from him, it's not going to do very well in the Senate. And if it does come from him, and it's a reasonable package, I think there's a bipartisan pathway forward.
All right, so do other Republican lawmakers share Graham's feelings, and is it clear what they want to see in a proposal from the president?
a lot of Republicans share Graham's assessment that this legislation is going nowhere unless it has the president's rock-solid support. Without that support, there is simply no way that Senate Republicans are going to go out on a political limb and support gun control measures unless they know that he's going to sign those measures and that any voters who support him are going to have to stick with them as well. A model for this, Elaine, is criminal justice reform, a piece of legislation that passed last year with a lot of Republican support that probably wouldn't have picked up that same Republican support under a Democratic president. But it's the fact that this proposal was coming out of the White House, working with both Democrats and Republicans, that gave Republicans the political cover to go ahead and support it. And that's what they would need again this time.
So we also mentioned that President Trump is considering legislation that is along the lines of the Manchin-Toomey amendment. What about Democrats? They were hoping for universal background checks. The White House has ruled that out. How likely will they get support from Democrats?
Right, and that's a sticky subject because the distinction here is that what passed in the Democratic-led House, H.R. 8, was this bill that basically expanded background checks universally. Anytime you sell a gun, give a gun to someone else, you'd have to complete a background check. A lot of Republicans believe that that's too onerous. What if you are selling a gun to a friend, to a family member, to someone you go to church with? They say that in those cases, you shouldn't have to subject yourself to a background check. And so what Manchin-Toomey does is that it expands background checks to all commercial gun sales, even sales at a gun show or online. And so that's the compromise position. And Democratic leaders have taken a hard line. As recently as this weekend, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were saying it's universal background checks or nothing. But a lot of Democrats, rank and file Democrats who are a little more pragmatic about this, say if Manchin-Toomey can pick up Republican support, then they'd be willing to go that route. And, the possibility of picking up a lot of Republican support is still by no means assured. Manchin-Toomey, which is a compromise position, still only got 4 Republican votes in the Senate the last time it came up 5 years ago. The big distinction, though, was that we had a Democratic president in the White House then. We've got a Republican president in the White House now. If he gets behind it, and it's still a big if, he hasn't committed to it, and when I tried to press the Attorney General on it today, even he wouldn't commit to Manchin-Toomey himself, said he's still talking to lawmakers, but if the president does get behind it, that's really the best shot that this legislation has at passing.
All right, a lot of people watching so closely to see if the dynamic on this issue changes. Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill for us. Nancy, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Elaine.